Humans sneered high arbitratorworks, are the galaxy's least inventive species, unless you count the creative ways they fail. The room erupted into the rhythmic clicking laughter of the assembled Thyan delegation. Their elongated bodies swayed like reeds in an invisible breeze, exuding smugness with every flick of their mandibles. The Galactic Symposium on Weaponry was in full session, and humanity was once again the subject of ridicule. Captain Reed stood at the podium, his face betraying nothing. His sharp uniform contrasted starkly with the organic, glimmering carapaces of the Thyan. Around him were representatives of dozens of species, all watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity. Humanity's inclusion in the symposium had been controversial from the start. It wasn't due to their technological prowess, but their perceived lack of it. Earth was considered backwater, its people barely capable of surviving, let alone innovating. "You claim humanity is primitive," Reed said, his voice carrying across the chamber, "and yet you invited us here. Why?" The laughter faded, leaving the quiet hum of translated whispers. Verks leaned forward, his pincers tapping the metallic table before him. "You misunderstand. This is charity. We sought to humor your species by inviting you to observe greatness. Surely it is better to learn from the masters than to wallow in ignorance." Another ripple of amusement passed through the chamber. Reed's fingers brushed a small device at his side, his face unreadable. "Ignorance," he repeated, his voice calm. "That's an interesting word coming from a species whose greatest weapon is essentially a glorified gas cylinder." Verks's mandibles twitched, an expression of affront. The Thyans prided themselves on their sonic disruptors, a weapon that could vibrate molecules apart. It was efficient, clinical, perfectly suited to their nature. Yet Reed's tone implied disdain. "Human," Verks said, his voice clicking dangerously. "What does your kind know of true innovation? The might of our disruptors can reduce any foe to dust in moments. What do you have? Crude combustion projectiles? Metal spears? Explain if you dare." Reed smiled, a small, almost imperceptible shift that only those closest to him noticed. "We have a vault." This simple statement seemed to confuse the audience. Species from across the galaxy leaned forward in their seats, their translators struggling to process the weight of the word. "The vault? What does that mean?" Verks clicked impatiently. "A vault of what? Relics? Trinkets from your endless wars against each other." Reed allowed the silence to stretch, the tension building in the chamber. Then he spoke. "A vault of every weapon humanity has ever created, from the earliest days of our existence to the present. Every innovation born of conflict, necessity, and desperation. Some call it a testament to our darkest instincts. Others call it insurance. Continued in next response due to character limits." A low murmur spread among the attendees. The idea was alien to many species, literally. Most civilizations in the galaxy had evolved past the need for extensive armament collections, relying on a few advanced systems to enforce peace. Humanity's obsession with weaponry, however, seemed both archaic and alarming. "Bluster," Verks snapped. "Even if such a thing exists, what could it possibly contain that would rival the precision of Thyan disruptors? The galaxy does not need to fear your primitive arsenal." "You might be right," Reed said. "But fear doesn't always come from the most advanced weapon. Sometimes it comes from the simplest idea." He turned to a holographic console beside him, entering a series of commands. The chamber's lights dimmed, and a projection filled the space above the podium. It was a grainy, black-and-white video, clearly ancient. Soldiers in bulky uniforms trudged through mud, carrying heavy rifles. Explosions erupted around them, the sound of distant artillery rumbling even through the ancient footage. Gas masks covered their faces as plumes of chemical vapor crept across the battlefield. "This," Reed said, "is from a war fought on our planet over a century ago. Primitive by today's standards, perhaps, But it marked the beginning of modern warfare for humanity. Those masks, they weren't for decoration. They were the only things standing between a soldier and a weaponized gas designed to suffocate its victims. Some of the aliens recoiled instinctively at the sight. Chemical warfare was considered barbaric, even among the most aggressive species. And yet, Reed continued, that war wasn't our most destructive, not even close. The projection shifted to another scene, a mushroom cloud rising into the sky, its scale incomprehensible. Gasps filled the chamber as the implications sank in. Many species understood the concept of fission, but had never imagined weaponizing it so brutally. We call this a nuclear weapon, Reed said. A single one can destroy an entire city in moments. For decades, our kind lived under the shadow of mutual destruction, knowing that if one of us launched, retaliation would wipe out everything we'd ever built. The room fell silent, the enormity of humanity's destructive capacity settling over the attendees like a shroud. Even Verks, whose mandibles had clicked so confidently before, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. But Reed wasn't finished. He gestured to the projection, which shifted once again. Now it displayed images of more modern weaponry. Automated drones swarming over landscapes, hypersonic missiles streaking toward targets, electromagnetic railguns firing projectiles with devastating speed and precision. This is just a fraction of what lies in our vault, Reed said. You see, humanity didn't stop at simple destruction. We learned how to innovate destruction at scale. We created weapons that can think for themselves, weapons that can target an enemy without ever putting a soldier at risk, and weapons that can neutralize entire fleets before they even enter our atmosphere. All because we're flawed, desperate, and far too stubborn to lose? A ripple of unease passed through the room. The Thyan disruptors, so celebrated, so feared, suddenly seemed quaint. Verks's mandibles opened and closed as if searching for a retort, but none came. One of the other delegates, a silvery, amorphous being from the Nthi Collective, finally broke the silence. If what you say is true, Captain, then why have you not conquered us all? Surely with such power, your species could rule the galaxy. Reed's expression softened, a flicker of weariness passing over his features. Because we know what it costs. Every weapon you've seen, every innovation in our vault, came at a price. Lives lost, worlds scarred, and the constant fear that one mistake could end everything. Humanity has walked to the edge of extinction more times than we care to admit. That's why we're here. And not to boast, not to threaten, but to remind you and ourselves what we stand to lose if we don't find a better way. The projection faded, and the lights returned to full brightness. Reed stepped back from the podium, his gaze sweeping across the stunned assembly. You can mock us for our history, for our flaws, for our relentless ingenuity. But understand this. Humanity doesn't fight to dominate. We fight to survive. And when survival is on the line, we can be inventive. For a moment, the chamber remained silent, the weight of Reed's words hanging in the air. Then, one by one, the delegates began to murmur among themselves, the tone no longer dismissive, but contemplative, even respectful. Verks sat motionless, his mandibles twitching in thought. Humanity might still be considered a young species, but in that moment, it was clear that youth had its own kind of power, a power born not of age, but of experience, resilience, and the relentless drive to adapt. The Galactic Symposium on Weaponry adjourned shortly afterward, the delegates dispersing to their respective worlds with much to consider. As Captain Reed left the chamber, a small smile played on his lips. Humanity had once again proven itself underestimated, and for now, that was exactly how he wanted it to stay.